going from a Sony platforming series straight into a Luigi's Mansion title. Yeah, this is feeling like old times again. So ever since I've done this whole reviewing thing, I made it a point to do something for Halloween every year as a sort of tradition I love to keep going. And the first two games I did for this were Luigi's Mansion and its sequel, Dark Moon, both of which I recommend. But at the end of the Dark Moon video, I said the following. Now, will there be a third one? Yeah, maybe. It's kind of up in the air if it will happen or not. Well, fast forward a few years and bam, Luigi's Mansion 3. With no alternative name this time. You're just gonna start numbering them out of nowhere like you did with Mario Kart? Alright, fine. Though it wasn't exactly a surprise, as fans pointed out how Luigi had a new Poltergust and Plunger in the Castlevania trailer for Super Smash Bros. So it was only a matter of time. Also, it's one of my favorite trailers for Ultimate, but moving on. Next Level Games were back at the helm for this, and the game was originally planned as a Wii U title, but not surprisingly, development was moved to Switch because numbers don't lie, and the game was released on Halloween of 2019, so most people were playing it in November by that point. They didn't think that one through, and that's why I didn't review it last year since there would be no time to get the review done within a day. Now, I really enjoyed both of the previous games, but they were very different in their execution, so maybe 3 was gonna be a bit more of a bridge between them? Only one way to find out, so let's get into it. So the residents of the Mushroom Kingdom are given a vacation to this new hotel called the Last Resort! This was thanks to one Helen Gravely, the head of the hotel. And with this amount of puns, I would hightail it out of there because Ace Attorney has told me that a murder is about to go down. But everyone heads to their respected rooms, with Luigi waking up and noticing something isn't right. So turns out Helen Gravely is a fan of one ghost in particular, King Boo, who has been freed from his painting and has placed everyone else in one. The king chases Luigi down a hall with him escaping into the laundry chute, and now the green man needs to make his way up the hotel, free everyone, and get King Boo back in his painting for the third time. Very short and to the point for this one. The plot is very in the background, maybe a little too much. Say what you will about Dark Moon's plot, while Mario getting kidnapped did feel really forced, I think it did a better job building up to King Boo for the final battle. Here, it feels like for a good portion of the game, they straight up forgot about him. And then on the final floor, they were like, oh! Right! King Boo! Helen gets a few moments where she's slightly annoyed at Luigi, but there's this weird lack of tension throughout the game, I'm not gonna lie. Also, on a side note, there's this whole thing where Helen is fangirling over King Boo, and you can just tell he's not impressed. They don't do much with it outside the final area. I think it would have helped if we saw elements of that sprinkled throughout, cause it honestly is a really entertaining idea. But in the grand scheme of things, that's just nitpicking, I wanted to mention it. So let's move on to presentation. So presentation-wise, I mean, do you see what's in front of ya? This series benefited so much with the jump to HD. I know Nintendo is still relatively new to HD, but man, seeing these characters with this much detail is simply splendid. Doubly impressive considering this is Next Level Games' first HD title. The modeling on the characters is fantastic, the lighting is top notch, and of course, just like Dark Moon, the animation is just incredible. Nailing that cartoon Halloween special feeling, and probably most impressive, cutscenes run in real time, which is really impressive considering this is the Switch. All I'm saying, these guys could honestly pass these cutscenes as a Hollywood movie and I would so be for it. We're also at the point where realistic overalls for Mario characters don't weird me out. Sorry Smash Bros. Brawl, it's a new day. Also, you can tell that Next Level Games were proud of their physics engine, because they just love having sections that show it off. Very similar to how Pixar would try and use their new technology any chance they could in their films. Every floor of the hotel has a unique theme that feels like part of a hotel. Like a shopping district, a music hall, a magic show, a pirate restaurant, they're so cool. But I won't lie, some parts don't really fit the hotel theme. Like I mentioned the magic show floor, but you go into the bathroom by the stage, and they got a bathtub? Like, why would they have that? That's a little odd. And then the castle and Egypt floors? Where those fit in a hotel, your guess is as good as mine. Though, I feel like I'm gonna be a bit against the grain with this next part. While the character animation is miles better than the previous game, with so much squash and stretch and a lot more little details added, like how EGAD now lip syncs to his gibberish dialogue, which is so bizarre. But I don't think as much personality shines through as much as Dark Moon. Luigi was absolutely the star of the show in that game, and had more expression than he ever has had in a game. But here, I don't feel the same way. I think one reason might be that they played up Luigi being scared a little too much. I know it's an iconic part of the series, but I couldn't help but notice how overplayed it was this time. Especially because he probably does it the most here, despite this being his third time dealing with the paranormal. And in Dark Moon, he entered levels with different animations, he did little dances after completing a mansion, and you have this incredibly wholesome scene with him in the teleporter. Here though, he just gives a little small yay when he gets a collectible, he reacts to situations in almost the same manner every time, and he repeats animations such as the elevator buttons consistently, which doesn't make him feel as alive as he did last time. And I find this really odd because in the opening hour or two, it's not like that at all. All the characters are so expressive and has so many great little touches, like say for Mario and Peach's rooms, you see a bunch of leftover pizza boxes just lying around for Mario, or how Peach has an overabundance of luggage that she doesn't need. These are great little touches to them. But after the main game starts, it really doesn't get that unique animation-wise. Very much like the soundtrack, which I can't really remember much of. Even the original theme isn't used that much, surprisingly. But overall, the presentation for Luigi's Mansion 3 is great, even with my more specific complaints. But let's head over to gameplay. So the gameplay is mostly like Dark Moon's, with elements of the first Luigi's Mansion. Pretty much you go to a floor of the hotel, clear out the ghosts, find keys to open new doors until you find a boss, suck them up, and get an elevator button to go to the next floor. Each floor has its own theme similar to the multiple mansions from last time. However, the major difference, the game is no longer mission based, and EGAD doesn't pull you out consistently. It's only like a few times at the start, but after that, you explore every floor to your whim. You have your trusty poltergust that can vacuum and blow, the charge and dark lights returning from Dark Moon, though with the dark light you don't need it to cool down like last time. But the new things to your arsenal? Well, first and foremost, a plunger. I mean, Luigi is technically a plumber by trade, so that makes sense. You can use this in conjunction with your vacuum to pull levers, slam objects down, stuff like that. The biggest new feature added to the game is a new entity. Say hello to Luigi. Well, okay, maybe not entirely new. He did show up in the multiplayer function of the remake of Luigi's Mansion for the 3DS, but here, he's an integral part to your progression. When you activate him, Luigi just kind of becomes dead inside, and you can use Luigi to go into vents, act in rooms separate to Luigi, or be used as a meat shield. Well, to everything except water. That will kill him instantly, but he does respawn fast if that ever happens. Throughout the game, you can find money that can be used in the shop to buy some one-use items, we'll get into that later, gems returning from Dark Moon, of which there's 6 on each floor, and later boos who you just kind of collect. And at the end of each floor, you'll fight a boss. Very similar to the portrait ghosts from the first game. All of them have different attack patterns and strategies you'll need to figure out in order to take them down, and get the elevator button to save the rest of the Mushroom Kingdom task force. And after you get Luigi, you get access to the multiplayer modes, Scarescraper and Scare Park. Scarescraper is pretty similar to last time. You and 3 other Luigis can pair up locally or online to go through floors catching ghosts, destroying bats, finding toads, etc. Every 5 floors you need to fight a rare ghost, and at the end you have the returning boo losses. And the Scare Park is a bunch of minigames that use the mechanics of the main game. However, they're local multiplayer only, so I wasn't able to try them out for this review because of things right now. So if people can say if it's good or not in the comments, go ahead, but it's there. And that's about it for the gameplay changes. So what did this third outing get right? So Next Level Games said when they started development for this title, they've watched a bunch of playthroughs of people doing Dark Moon online to get an idea of where to change things for their sequel. The game getting rid of EGAD pulling you out all the time and the mission-based structure were easily the 2 biggest improvements. It helps the flow of the game, making it easier to keep playing floor to floor in one sitting. Plus, it's probably good for Luigi's health that EGAD doesn't call him much this time. Considering the communication device is a Virtual Boy, I think Luigi would prefer not to go blind, thank you. I also really enjoyed some of the puzzles, such as the ones in the Egyptian level that required you weighting scales, or moving the sand to make a ramp. These were really fun to solve. But the best of the puzzles involved Luigi. I'll admit, I was worried about this thing at first, since I was fearing it was going to feel like some forced co-op mechanic. And while at times, yes it can be, the puzzles that actively use Luigi are really fun, such as making him go through pipes with Luigi guiding him, areas where you can't have Luigi pass through since there's water so you need to find another way, there's times where Luigi gets kidnapped and you need to use Luigi to save him. Even Helen has one of the coolest uses for Luigi, where you need him to turn off power grids while making sure Luigi avoids danger up top. It's easily one of the best uses of him in the game, and when I look at this scenario, I wonder if maybe this mechanic was originally meant to use the Wii U gamepad. It would make sense. The moment I was fighting the T-Rex boss, I couldn't tell what I was supposed to do in the later phase, and then I got the idea to use Luigi to save some health while I planned out things, and then my eyes lighting up when I found out you actually needed to sacrifice him to get an opening. That was a great moment. And speaking of which, while I did have my complaints about the personality earlier, the scenes where it shows Luigi's lack of personality were easily some of the biggest laughs in the game, and I wish there were more of these honestly. Like one of my favorite details when Luigi gets an item, the main Luigi's lifeless body just doing this half-hearted thumbs up was one of my favorite little touches in the whole game. But speaking of the bosses, they are for sure a highlight, each of them taking more of a puzzle element to open them up, similar to the first game, and each of them having different strategies. Some of my favorites were the Ghost Shark where you need to avoid him when he became part of the ship, the magic fight where they hide under hats and you need to keep track of which ones, and the fights that specifically use Luigi were some of the highlights. Figuring out these was such a good capstone to each floor. And I'd say a majority of the floors hit their mark, while many of them at the start just feel like normal hotel floors. Once you get to the medieval one, that's where they really start to become more fleshed out. Some of my personal favorites involve the movie studio, that involved you going in between sets to bring items to help you with that scenario, and when you look through the camera, it creates a set with the blue screen, and the floor ends with a Godzilla-like boss fight with Luigi. It's such a fun floor. Especially Morty the director was my favorite ghost in the whole game. He's an optional one you can capture, but I just didn't have it in me. I mean, he's editing a project all night that he's really passionate about. Yeah, that hits a little too close to home. Other floors I really enjoyed were the magic show floor because of all the illusions and stage design antics, the fitness center because it worked so well with the hotel aesthetic, and one of the most interesting fights in the game, and maybe my personal favorite, the dance hall. It's a super short floor, but I love all the neon lighting and theming. It totally feels like part of a cruise ship or something. And then the boss fight involves... This is amazing. This is amazing! Also, I do think the multiplayer is better this time around. The maps have more variety, the different types of tasks allow you to spice up the gameplay a little bit more. It's just a better experience overall. But sadly, that last statement can't be said for the game as a whole. There was definitely some stuff in Luigi's Mansion 3 that I just couldn't help notice was starting to annoy me more as the game went on, so let's get into it. Luigi doesn't have a run button, and this honestly threw me off for the first few hours. I still had the muscle memory from Dark Moon, cause if you press the B button now, you go into strafing. I was able to adjust to it, but even then, I did feel like Luigi's movement speed was just a tad slow. It's manageable, but some of the bigger floors, I did kind of want him to get a move on easier. Speaking of bigger floors, there's sadly not much of a reason to explore them. The only collectible worth anything is cash. Not so much for the shop items, because at the end the game does a whole ranking system from the first game, with very little warning beforehand. I mean, the cash is very easy to come by if you have a basic sense of where goodies are hidden. Trust me, you'll get an A or B no problem. But I do hope you didn't spend too much money at that shop, which will actively hurt you, because these items are just for finding gems and booze, which is honestly pointless. The gems, despite being fun for their puzzles, I'll give you that, they don't do much besides collecting all of them gives you a new cosmetic for your light. I mean, in Dark Moon they didn't do too much either, but with the returning ranking system with money, I would have liked to see them be worth a monetary value like the gems were in the first game. That would give me more of a reason to hunt for them. And the boos are such an afterthought this time. They don't even show up until you clear a floor and then leave it. It's not a struggle to capture them, and your reward for them, a flashlight decal. Yeah, no thank you. Dark Moon at least gave you a new level for that mansion for getting them all. So with that, if the money is very easy to come by, and there's no reason to go for the major collectibles, that does hurt the game's replay value. But you're gonna revisit floors anyway, because of stuff like that. Okay, so you remember how in Dark Moon, you had those missions where you need to go and catch ghosts just as you were about to get to the next area? You know, the parts that were pretty blatant padding? They do the exact same thing with this cat who steals one of your elevator buttons twice, and then you need to go to the floors you were just at to do a waiting game and then suck her up 3 times to get them back. For as much as Next Level listened to the feedback, I'm honestly shocked this didn't get fixed. If anything, I think it's even more intrusive padding. I could maybe pass it off as another mission for the sake of it in Dark Moon, but here you go to visit the floor you were just at, and you still have to backtrack to the elevator like nothing happened. It just gets in the way of the pacing of a game that, admittingly like Dark Moon, I felt like was kind of starting to overstay its welcome a bit by the end, I'm not gonna lie. There's also cases where concepts get introduced and then dropped immediately after. The biggest offender is this power up to your vacuum. There's only one mandatory use for this thing in the whole game. How was this thing not used for a boss fight? It feels like it was made for one. There's also smaller stuff like cutting objects with a saw, the teleporting screens. I get making every floor feeling unique, but I think some elements need to be brought from other floors so they can expand upon it, making really intricate level design. I'll put it like this, not a single floor in this game beats that final mansion from Dark Moon. While I was really excited of the idea of the boss ghosts being like portrait ghosts, and their boss fights are fun, don't get me wrong, but I don't think their personalities shine through as much. They have their own gimmicks, but many of them personality-wise feel too similar to one another, and I don't get much uniqueness from each of them, which makes their interactions feel more stale. Which is weird because Next Level is usually fantastic with giving their characters so much personality. You don't even get a little text blurb about them like you did with the first game. While small, I think it would have helped out, and while the puzzle parts of the fights are fine. Alright, I've been avoiding talking about it for the whole review. Let's talk about combat. So how combat works in this game is when you're capturing a ghost, kind of like Dark Moon, you get a special move once the meter is filled up. In this case, you can slam them to the ground, and you can do this multiple times in a row, and it takes off a good chunk of health each time. And this absolutely snaps the entire game in half. In the previous 2 games, the actual struggle was trying to push back against the ghosts in the original, or planning your burst and when to let go to avoid damage like in Dark Moon. Here, there's no struggle of any kind. Once you slam a ghost down, they don't resist at any point, and almost every ghost will go down in one slam session, no problem. And if you think multiple ghosts would make it more interesting, nope. When you slam a ghost down, they not only stand in place, but they can get hit by the slam, taking damage from it, and are now in a stun state of their very own. And you can slam in 360 degrees, so you're never at a disadvantage. Not to mention it will remove any armor or weapon that a ghost has. And this will work on any class of ghosts, even if you slam a weaker one into a stronger one. They can also straight up get rid of the small fry. This makes combat tiring because you're doing the same thing every encounter, and the classes of enemies don't get to shine because, frankly, they don't matter in this system. Even the final hallway was a complete cakewalk. This continues in the boss fights, where the act of sucking them up feels more like a victory lap than part of the fight, and more a transition onto the next phase, as opposed to the original game, where the challenge was to try and get the ghost with one attempt to get the highest rank possible, which fed into your cash flow. Here, there's nothing like that, and it makes some of the bosses just kind of drag on. Especially the final boss, which is easily the weakest boss in the game, and the weakest final boss in the series thus far. I'll be real, my opinion kept changing throughout the entire game because for every 2 or 3 steps forward, it felt like there was one major step back, and this happened on repeat throughout the entire game, so by the end, I didn't really know how I felt about the game as a whole. but I gotta put it into words now, so here's what I got. Luigi's Mansion 3 was a roller coaster ride in more ways than one. I felt its quality kept changing so frequently that I didn't know what my verdict was gonna be the entire way through. I think a lot of it comes down to while the first two games share Luigi's Mansion in their name, design-wise they are very different, and trying to force Dark Moon to become more like the original game without making all the appropriate accommodations is gonna lead to some rough patches. The game for sure makes some great improvements, like the boss fights, fixing up some of the more annoying aspects of Dark Moon, like Dark Light usage, EGAD no longer calling you and removing you from a mission, but it also makes some problems that are even more intrusive, such as the forced cat backtracking, or making the collectibles even less worth it. Or creates problems that weren't even in Dark Moon. The combat definitely being the biggest blow to the game by far. It definitely doesn't come close to being the first game, and I would honestly tie it with Dark Moon. But even then, I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up becoming my least favorite out of the three, and I really didn't think I would be saying that going in. Now let me make it clear, I'm not calling the game bad. The game is competently made, it's a fun time, but I just wasn't having as much fun as I did previously. I would still recommend this if you enjoyed playing the other games, but I would wait for a sale on this one. When the elevator ride up was this shaky, I don't think I'm getting back in anytime soon. I'm definitely expecting some people to not agree with me on that one, and I know many do consider this a better game than Dark Moon, but for me, for every time I felt like there was a step towards its true potential, it took a massive step back. Though since a Luigi's Mansion after this is probably not gonna be for a while, I am curious what next level games are gonna do next. I do want them to maybe revive an older franchise like they did with Punch-Out Wii, who knows? But for now, I'll take my leave. Happy Halloween.